Have you ever wondered why a very specific fear seems to follow you through life? Not just general anxiety, not the logical things that everyone's afraid of, but that one irrational, persistent fear that seems to hold an invisible grip on your emotions. Even when you try to ignore it, it might seem like just a personal flaw, something random, something you were simply unlucky to inherit. But the truth is, it was never random. The human mind doesn't operate by accident. Beneath everything we think is logical, there are invisible patterns, psychological forces, hidden programs coded deep inside the unconscious. And one of the most powerful clues to understanding yourself is your biggest fear. When you look at the frameworks of analytical psychology, the same ones used to decode dreams, archetypes, and the hidden self, you realize that fear isn't just an emotional reaction. It's a symbolic message, a mirror, a doorway to something the conscious mind doesn't want to face, but desperately needs to, because fear is the language your unconscious uses to whisper, "Here is where you are stuck. Here is what you've been avoiding. And here is the exact place where your growth begins." It's not about superstition. It's not fortune-telling. It's psychological truth. The unconscious mind doesn't communicate with words. It communicates with symbols, patterns, and emotional tension. Your fear isn't just trying to hurt you. It's trying to reveal you. And once you understand what your deepest fear is actually pointing to, you'll never look at yourself the same way again. In this exploration, we'll decode the symbolic meaning behind the most common core fears. Why you have it, where it comes from, and most importantly, what your soul is asking you to transform through it. But before we begin, a reminder, this is not about labeling yourself. It's not about judgment. It's about seeing the invisible patterns that have shaped your life all along, and realizing that fear was never your enemy. It was the invitation you've been ignoring. Now, take a deep breath, because once you hear what your fear has been trying to tell you, there's no way to unhear it. When most people think about fear, they imagine it as something external, a threat, a danger, something to avoid, escape, or overcome. But fear is rarely that simple. In fact, most of the fear that governs your life doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't come from spiders, heights, or dark alleys. It comes from within, from the invisible architecture of your own unconscious mind, from the patterns that were formed long before you had words to describe them, from the stories your nervous system started writing the moment you arrived in this world, or maybe even before. When we look deeper, beneath the surface of everyday anxieties, we begin to realize something profound. Each person carries a core fear, not just a random phobia, but a symbolic pattern, a psychological wound, a shadow that subtly influences how you love, how you trust, how you work, how you move through the world, and especially how you protect yourself. And while it might seem like that fear is holding you back, the truth is, it's actually showing you the exact doorway you've been avoiding. Because as uncomfortable as fear is, it's never meaningless. In the frameworks of analytical psychology, fear operates like a mirror. It reflects the parts of yourself that you haven't yet integrated, the parts that were once too painful, too overwhelming, or too forbidden for the conscious mind to hold. So the psyche did what it always does. It protected you. It split. It repressed. It buried. And in place of clarity, it left fear. But fear is not an enemy. It's a guide. It's the unconscious mind's way of pointing to the wound that needs to be transformed into wisdom. It's the psyche's way of whispering, "Here is where you are not free. Here is the shadow you've been running from. And here is the exact place where your power has always been waiting." This is not philosophy. This is not motivational fluff. This is how the unconscious works. The symbols you avoid don't disappear. They become fears. The emotions you suppress don't vanish. They become triggers. The parts of yourself you exile don't die. They become the shadow you mistake for the world being dangerous, when in truth, it's the unloved parts of yourself trying to get your attention. And if you're courageous enough to look, you'll see that what you've called my fear this whole time was actually your soul's map for transformation. There are patterns in the psyche that most people never see. Invisible mechanisms running quietly in the background of your life, influencing every decision, every relationship, every moment where you find yourself shrinking back, hesitating, or feeling stuck without knowing why. Fear is one of the most misunderstood parts of the human experience. Most people think of it as something to fight, to suppress, or to ignore. But the truth is, fear is not a flaw in the system. It is the system's way of protecting you from something unresolved, unintegrated, and unseen. When you begin to observe fear through a psychological lens, something becomes clear very quickly. Fear is not random. It is not chaotic. It is highly organized. It follows patterns that mirror the symbolic structure of the unconscious. Every fear you carry has a root, and that root is never about what it appears to be on the surface. What looks like a fear of failure may actually be a fear of abandonment. What seems like a fear of rejection might actually be a fear of not being worthy of love. And the surface-level avoidance of conflict could be masking a much deeper fear of disconnection, of being misunderstood, or of becoming invisible to the people who matter most. Analytical psychology has shown that the psyche is not passive. It is active. It constantly generates images, emotions, and reactions that are designed to push you toward growth, toward individuation, toward becoming whole. But growth is not always pleasant. The psyche doesn't push you toward comfort. It pushes you toward truth, and that truth is often guarded by fear. Fear becomes the gatekeeper between the life you are living and the life you are truly meant to embody. This is why fear shows up at the edges of change, at the doorway to transformation, at the exact moment when you are about to outgrow an old identity or confront a part of yourself that has been hidden in shadow. You can run from it, you can numb it, you can pretend it's not there, but it won't disappear, because the psyche is patient. It will wait. It will wait as long as it takes for you to turn around, look at the fear directly, and finally ask, "What are you really trying to tell me?" And when you ask that question, truly ask it without judgment, something shifts. Fear transforms from an enemy into a mirror, into a message, into an ally that has been waiting for you to stop fighting it and start listening. The discomfort was never meant to punish you. It was meant to point you toward the exact wound, the exact pattern, and the exact unconscious material that is ready to be brought into awareness. This is the hidden architecture of fear. It is not random. It is not meaningless. It is the psyche's way of communicating. And the reason it feels so uncomfortable is because it touches the part of you that is unfinished. The part that still believes in an old story about who you are and what you are allowed to have, feel, or become. But here is the truth most people never realize. The moment you stop seeing fear as something to eliminate and start seeing it as something to decode, you begin a process that changes everything. You step out of survival mode. You stop organizing your life around avoidance. And for the first time, you start moving toward freedom, not just the absence of fear, but the presence of clarity, wholeness, and self-trust. This is not about forcing yourself to be fearless. That's just another form of resistance. This is about understanding the map your fear has been drawing all along. And when you learn to read it, you realize something profound. The thing you've been running from is not a threat. It's a signal, a symbol, a doorway back to yourself. For some, the greatest fear is not failure, not danger, not even death. It is rejection, the silent terror that whispers, "If they see who I really am, they will leave." This is not just a surface discomfort around criticism or judgment. It is a deep existential wound that strikes at the very core of belonging. It comes from a primitive truth that as social beings, being cast out, excluded, or abandoned once meant death. And even though the modern world no longer operates that way, the nervous system has not evolved out of it. Those who carry this fear often live their lives performing, smiling when they don't feel like it, agreeing when they want to disagree, becoming what others expect while quietly abandoning themselves in the process. It's an exhausting cycle, one where the need to be accepted overrides the need to be authentic. But here's the painful paradox. The more they try to be what others want, the more disconnected they feel. Because acceptance achieved at the cost of authenticity is never real acceptance. It's a mask, a performance, a fragile contract based on conditions that are impossible to sustain forever. In the framework of depth psychology, the fear of rejection points directly to an unconscious narrative. That love is conditional. That being fully yourself is dangerous. That if you show the messy, complicated, raw truth of who you are, you will lose everything. But the truth is the exact opposite. The parts of you that you are most afraid to reveal are the parts most longing to be seen, not by everyone, but by the right people. People whose acceptance does not depend on your perfection, but on your presence, on your realness, on the wholeness of who you are. The real work here is not about eliminating the fear of rejection. It's about transforming it, seeing it as the psyche's way of asking, when did you first learn that being yourself was dangerous? And are you ready to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of being chosen? Because the greatest rejection is not the one that comes from others. It's the one that happens internally every time you betray your own truth, in the hope that someone else will love the version of you that isn't even real. When this fear is faced, not with aggression, but with curiosity, it becomes a portal, a doorway back to self-acceptance, and the paradox is profound. The moment you stop needing everyone to choose you is the moment the right people start showing up, not because you've finally become perfect, but because you've finally become real. Fear of failure. There is a certain kind of fear that doesn't just whisper, it paralyzes. The fear of failure. The quiet belief that says, if I try and I don't succeed, everything will collapse. I will lose respect, I will lose love, I will lose myself. On the surface, it looks like procrastination, perfectionism, or hesitation, but underneath it's never about the failure itself. It's about what failure symbolizes to the unconscious mind: shame, worthlessness, and the risk of confirming. The deepest fear of all, that maybe I was never good enough to begin with. Those who carry this fear often become masters of avoidance, not because they're lazy, not because they lack ambition, but because their nervous system has learned to associate failure with humiliation, pain, and even emotional annihilation. Somewhere deep inside, there's a belief that says, if I fail, it won't just be an event, it will define me. This is why so many people stay stuck in preparation, stuck in waiting, stuck in perfecting, not because they aren't capable, but because the unconscious has created a survival pattern that says it's safer not to try than to try and prove to yourself that you're not enough. But here's the truth hidden beneath this pattern. a truth that most never realize. Failure isn't proof of inadequacy. It's the initiation into mastery. It's the doorway into growth, expansion, and resilience. Every person you've ever admired has failed, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. The difference is they stopped treating failure as an identity. They started treating it as information, as refinement, as part of the natural process of becoming. And yet, understanding this intellectually doesn't always solve the problem, because this isn't a logical issue, it's an emotional one, a symbolic one. The unconscious doesn't operate through logic, it operates through patterns, tension, and unresolved emotional codes. This is why most people stay trapped in this cycle for years, even decades, knowing they could be doing more, living more, expressing more, but somehow feeling like they just can't. And this is exactly where the real transformation begins. The moment you stop fighting your fear of failure, the moment you stop treating it as the enemy and start recognizing it for what it really is. A message from your unconscious asking you to reconnect with the part of yourself you've been exiling. I know. No one ever taught us how to do this. No one showed us how to listen to the language of the psyche, how to decode the tension between what we consciously want and what our unconscious has been quietly resisting for years. This is exactly why I created the SIM method, a simple but powerful daily practice designed to help you clear mental chaos, integrate your shadow, and reconnect with your inner center in just 5 minutes a day. Not through motivation, not through empty affirmations, but through a real psychological process. One that finally creates space for the clarity, the peace, and the self-trust that has always been waiting underneath the noise. Inside this ebook, you'll learn how to understand the emotional root behind the fear of failure. Dissolve the mental patterns that keep you stuck in avoidance, and most importantly, transform fear into clarity, not by suppressing it, but by integrating it. This isn't just a book. It's a mirror, a toolkit, a doorway back to yourself. If you feel ready, the link is pinned right now in the comments below. Start small, start within, because the freedom you've been searching for out there has always been waiting for you in here. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop organizing your life around avoiding failure is the moment your life actually begins. Not because you've eliminated fear, but because you've finally stopped letting it decide who you're allowed to become. Fear of abandonment. There is a kind of fear that doesn't scream. It doesn't always show up as panic or loud resistance. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the background of your life, as a constant tension in relationships, as hypervigilance, as a feeling of walking on eggshells, always wondering, what if they leave? What if I'm not enough to make them stay? The fear of abandonment is not a surface-level insecurity. It is an imprint, a wound carved so deep into the unconscious that it becomes a lens through which every interaction is filtered. It often begins in early life, sometimes in obvious ways, like the loss of a parent or caregiver, but often it begins more subtly, through emotional absence, through inconsistency, through moments when a child's nervous system learns that love is unpredictable, unreliable, and unsafe, and the pattern doesn't go away with time. It matures. It becomes woven into how someone loves, how they attach, how they behave. People who carry this fear often oscillate between two extremes. Either they become hyper-attuned to others, caretaking, pleasing, doing whatever it takes to be chosen, to be needed, to be indispensable, or they preemptively withdraw, keeping their heart behind glass, telling themselves that it's safer not to rely on anyone because eventually everyone leaves. But here is the cruel irony. In trying to protect themselves from abandonment, they often abandon themselves first. They disconnect from their needs, their voice, their desires, believing that if they're easy enough, agreeable enough, selfless enough, they won't be left. And yet, the more they perform for love, the more hollow it feels. Because love that has to be earned by abandoning yourself is not love, it's survival. In the lens of depth psychology, the fear of abandonment is more than an emotional wound. It is a symbolic confrontation with the archetype of separation. The existential fear of disconnection not just from others, but from the self. It reflects an unconscious belief that says, I am only worthy if I am useful, if I am perfect, if I never become a burden. But the truth is painful and liberating. At the same time, the love you've been trying to earn from others cannot heal the love you've withheld from yourself. This is the work, not to convince others to stay, not to prove your worth, but to become the person who no longer abandons themselves, who no longer trades authenticity for attachment, who no longer silences their own needs just to maintain proximity to someone else. And when this fear is brought into awareness, when it is met not with shame, but with curiosity, it begins to soften. You start to realize that the person you were most afraid of losing was never really out there. It was always the parts of yourself you left behind in the pursuit of being loved, and the paradox unfolds. The moment you stop chasing people to stay is the moment you become magnetic to those who can actually meet you, not because you've become what they wanted, but because you've finally become who you are. Fear of losing control. There is a type of fear that doesn't always look like fear. It often disguises itself as hyperproductivity, overplanning, rigidity, or the constant need to manage, fix, and control everything and everyone around you. On the surface, it looks like discipline. It looks like responsibility. It even looks like success. But beneath it, there's something much heavier, a deep, relentless terror that says, if I let go, everything will fall apart. This is not just a fear of chaos. It is a fear of vulnerability, a fear of surrender, a fear of the unknown. Somewhere deep inside, the unconscious holds the belief that letting go of control is equivalent to danger, emotional, psychological, or even physical, that relaxing, trusting, allowing means risking everything. Those who carry this fear live in a constant state of tension, a quiet, invisible pressure that never fully lets up. They often micromanage themselves, their emotions, their image, their relationships, their future, because the psyche has convinced itself that being in control is the only way to be safe. But here's the truth hidden beneath this pattern, one that most never see. Control is an illusion. It has always been. Life is movement, it is uncertainty, it is fluidity. And the more you try to force it into fixed shapes, the more brittle everything becomes, including you. From the lens of depth psychology, the fear of losing control is the psyche's reaction to chaos. Not external chaos, but internal fragmentation. Somewhere along the way, a part of the self learned that emotions were overwhelming, unpredictable, or even dangerous. And so the unconscious adapted. It built walls. It built rules. It built systems of perfectionism, overthinking, and rigid expectations, not to thrive, but to survive. But survival is not living. Survival is existing in a contracted state where every step feels heavy, where peace is conditional, where rest feels like a risk. The work here isn't about abandoning structure. It's about abandoning the belief that control creates safety. It never did. The nervous system was never designed to live in constant vigilance, and the psyche was never designed to flourish under the weight of perfection. When this fear is finally brought into awareness, something profound begins to happen. You realize that the thing you were most afraid to surrender is the very thing that's been suffocating you, and that true power doesn't come from controlling life. It comes from meeting life fully, honestly, and without resistance. Surrender doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean giving up. It means releasing the fantasy that you can control outcomes, people, or the future, and returning instead to what you can control: your presence, your choices, your responses, and your relationship to yourself. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to control life is the moment life starts to flow. Not because it becomes perfect, but because you finally stop confusing safety with certainty, and you begin to discover that the real safety has always been inside of you. Fear of being alone. There is a fear that doesn't always scream. It whispers, a subtle but constant echo in the background of the mind that says, "What if I end up alone?" This isn't just a surface-level discomfort with solitude. It's a deep existential anxiety rooted in something far greater than the simple absence of people. It's the fear that without connection, without someone witnessing your life, your existence somehow loses meaning. This fear often begins so early that most people never even realize how much it drives their choices. It's woven into how they love, how they stay in relationships that no longer serve them, how they compromise their boundaries, or how they chase validation from people who were never capable of offering real presence. To the unconscious mind, being alone isn't just uncomfortable. It symbolizes abandonment, insignificance, and even emotional annihilation. It whispers that if no one is there, then maybe you don't matter at all. But here is the harsh paradox. In the desperate attempt to avoid loneliness, people often abandon themselves. They stay where they don't belong. They silence their own needs. They become who they are not, just to keep someone, anyone, close. And yet, even surrounded by people, that hollow feeling persists, because the real loneliness isn't the absence of others. It's the absence of yourself within your own life. From the perspective of depth psychology, the fear of being alone is not just about social isolation. It reflects a deeper disconnection, the separation from the self, from the inner world, from the ability to sit with one's own emotions, to witness one's own thoughts without judgment, and to experience one's own presence as enough. The unconscious projects this unresolved tension outward, convincing the conscious mind that safety comes from constant interaction, external validation, and proximity to others. But the truth is, no amount of external company can fill the void left by self-abandonment, and here lies the transformation. The antidote to the fear of being alone is not other people. It's becoming someone you no longer want to run away from. It's learning how to turn inward without collapsing, how to sit with silence without suffocating, how to meet your own eyes in the mirror without flinching. When this fear is brought into conscious awareness, something begins to shift. You realize that the loneliness you were running from was not an external enemy. It was the space inside of you that had been waiting, patiently, quietly, for you to come home. And the paradox is beautiful. The moment you become comfortable In your own presence is the moment you stop accepting half-love, crumbs of attention, and relationships that require you to shrink. Because suddenly, being alone is no longer terrifying. It's sacred, it's peaceful, it's powerful, and from that place, real connection begins. Not because you need someone to complete you, but because you are finally meeting others as someone who is already whole. You've spent a lifetime believing that fear was something to avoid, something to fight, something to silence. But what if it was never the enemy? What if the very thing you've been running from was actually the doorway you were meant to walk through all along? The patterns, the resistance, the tension that's lived quietly inside your mind for years. None of it was random. None of it was broken. It was the language of the unconscious, the psyche's way of whispering again and again, "Look here, pay attention. This is where you are not yet free." Every fear carries a mirror, not of the world, not of danger, but of yourself, of the parts you've exiled, the emotions you've suppressed, the truths you've learned to avoid because they felt too heavy, too overwhelming, or too painful to hold. But here's the truth no one ever told you. Your fear has always been your guide. A painful guide, yes. A relentless one sometimes, but a guide nonetheless. One that has never been trying to destroy you. It has only ever been trying to wake you up, to call you back, to bring you home to the parts of yourself you've abandoned along the way, because growth isn't about eliminating fear. It's about understanding it, listening to it, decoding it, and learning how to transform it into the clarity, the peace, and the presence that has always been waiting underneath. And the paradox is profound. The moment you stop running, the moment you stop organizing your life around avoidance, is the moment life begins to expand. Not because fear disappears, but because it finally stops deciding who you're allowed to become. So now the question is no longer, how do I get rid of fear? The question is, am I ready to finally understand what it's been trying to tell me all along? Because once you hear it, once you truly listen, there is no way to unhear it.